They said the gala was invitation only, but the truth was it was judgment only, the kind of place where crystal chandeliers didn't just hang from ceilings, they hung expectations over every head in the room. Ethan Cole stood near the back wall, fingers brushing the cuff of a suit he'd borrowed, not rented, borrowed, because every dollar he made went toward school lunches, rent, and the tiny savings account he promised his daughter would one day become college money. He didn't belong here, and everyone in the room knew it. The laughter was softer near him, the glances sharper, like they could smell effort on him. Gold trays floated past with champagne he wouldn't touch, because tomorrow morning he had to wake up at 5 a.m. and make pancakes shaped like stars for a 7-year-old who still believed her dad could do anything. This gala wasn't about charity the way flyers claimed. It was about power, about who mattered and who was allowed to pretend they did. Ethan was only here because his company's CEO insisted, said it would look good, said donors liked seeing real people. He adjusted his tie, breathed once, and reminded himself why he came, one night of discomfort for a month of job security. That was the math of being a single dad. You endure. The woman who slapped him would later say it was an accident. A misunderstanding. A moment. But moments don't echo like this one did. She was polished in a way that suggested she'd never rushed through a grocery store calculating which brand was cheaper per ounce. Her name was Vanessa Hartwell, heir to a real estate empire, board member of 3 charities, and the kind of person whose apology could erase headlines. She approached him with a glass in hand, eyes already narrowed, scanning him like an item misplaced on a shelf. "Excuse me," she said, not waiting for an answer. "You're standing in the donor section." Ethan opened his mouth to explain, to say he'd been told to stand here, to smile and nod and not embarrass anyone. But before he could finish a sentence she wasn't listening to, her hand came up fast, sharp, public. The sound wasn't loud, but it was clean, like a book slammed shut. The room froze. Conversations died mid-word. Someone gasped. Someone else laughed nervously, unsure if they were supposed to. Ethan felt heat bloom across his cheek, but what hurt wasn't the sting. It was the silence that followed, the way no one rushed in, no one asked if he was okay. They were watching, measuring how small he would make himself next. Vanessa's voice cut through the quiet. "Don't touch me," she said, though he hadn't. "Security will handle this." And just like that, 2 men in black suits shifted closer, not to her, but to him. Ethan could have apologized. He could have bowed his head, taken the blame, walked out with his pride folded neatly behind his ribs. That's what they expected. That's what men like him were supposed to do. He looked down at his hands, steady, roughened from work and time, hands that had learned how to braid hair by watching YouTube videos, hands that had signed permission slips and hospital forms alone. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whispered, "Who even is he?" Another voice replied, "Probably staff." The word landed heavier than the slap. Ethan lifted his head. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't clench his fists. He did something far more dangerous. He smiled. Not a soft smile. Not a forgiving one. The kind of smile that arrives when a decision has already been made. "You're right," he said calmly. "This isn't my section." He stepped forward, not toward the exit, but toward the center of the room, toward the stage where the charity's logo glowed in white light. Security hesitated, confused. Vanessa frowned. "Sir, you need to leave," one guard said. Ethan nodded. "I will," he replied. "Right after I return something." He reached into his jacket pocket, fingers closing around a slim black flash drive he'd been carrying all night, not knowing if he'd ever need it, only knowing that something about tonight felt off. The CEO who invited him here hadn't looked him in the eye all evening. The donors had smiled too wide. And Vanessa Hartwell had just made the kind of mistake rich people only make when they believe consequences are optional. The host of the gala was announcing the next speaker when Ethan stepped onto the stage. A ripple of shock moved through the room. "Sir," the host began, but Ethan leaned toward the microphone, his voice steady, clear, impossible to ignore. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "This won't take long." He turned, scanning the room once, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. "I was invited here tonight as an example," he continued. "An example of who this charity claims to help. A single father. A working-class employee. Someone who's supposed to look grateful just for being allowed into the room." Murmurs spread like spilled water. Vanessa took a step forward. "This is inappropriate," she snapped. Ethan looked at her then, really looked, and something in his eyes made her stop. "So was slapping someone in front of 200 people, he replied evenly. A few gasps turned into whispers. Phones appeared, subtle at first, then openly raised. Ethan held up the flash drive. "This," he said, "contains information I wasn't supposed to see. Documents I found while fixing a server error for my company. I didn't go looking for them. They were labeled Hartwell Foundation, internal." Vanessa's face drained of color. The CEO who had invited Ethan here stood abruptly. "Ethan, let's talk about this privately," he said, forcing a laugh. Ethan shook his head. "Private conversations are how this keeps happening," he said. "Public is how it stops." He turned back to the crowd. "This charity raised millions last year," he continued. "But less than 8% reached the families it claims to support. The rest?" He paused, letting the numbers sink in. "Administrative fees. Executive bonuses. Luxury retreats listed as fundraising strategy." The room erupted. Someone shouted. Someone else demanded proof. Ethan plugged the flash drive into the laptop already on stage for presentations. The screen flickered, then filled with spreadsheets, emails, highlighted transfers. Vanessa lunged forward. "Turn that off," she hissed. Security moved, but this time they hesitated, eyes darting between the screen and the phones recording everything. Ethan stepped back, giving the screen space to speak for itself. "I didn't come here to humiliate anyone," he said quietly. "I came because tonight, my daughter asked me why rich people get to decide who deserves help. And I didn't have an answer I liked." His voice wavered for half a second, then steadied. "So here's the truth. Power doesn't come from money. It comes from silence. And I'm done being silent." The slap that was meant to put him in his place had put him on a stage instead. Vanessa's perfect world cracked under fluorescent light, and everyone in the room felt it. Reporters were already pushing toward the doors. Donors whispered into phones. The host stood frozen, script forgotten. Ethan unplugged the flash drive and slipped it back into his pocket. "I'll leave now," he said, stepping down. No one stopped him. No one touched him. As he walked toward the exit, the same people who wouldn't meet his eyes earlier now watched him like he'd shifted the gravity of the room. At the door, he turned once more. "If you're watching this later," he said, glancing at a phone held high, lens glowing red, "remember this. Respect isn't given by rooms like this. It's taken the moment you decide you won't accept less." He opened the door and stepped into the night air, heart pounding, cheeks still burning, unaware that by morning his name would be everywhere. And if this story has you hooked already, if you want to see what happens when the fallout hits, when power fights back and a single dad refuses to bend, make sure you subscribe to the channel right now, because what Ethan does next doesn't just shock a room, it changes everything. By the time Ethan reached the sidewalk, the cold air felt unreal, like stepping out of a dream where everything had been too bright and too loud. His phone vibrated before he could even unlock the car. Then again. And again. He didn't look. Not yet. He sat behind the wheel, forehead resting against it, breathing slow, counting the way his daughter's therapist had once taught him, 4 in, 4 out, after her mother died and the world had tilted off its axis. Inside the building, he could still hear the muffled roar of voices, the sound of a carefully controlled narrative exploding. The slap replayed in his mind, not as pain, but as a line crossed. He hadn't planned to expose anyone tonight. He'd planned to smile, endure, and leave quietly. But something about the way Vanessa Hartwell's hand had moved, confident, careless, had flipped a switch he didn't know he had. He turned the key. The engine started. The phone buzzed again. This time he glanced. Unknown number. Then another. News alerts stacked like falling dominoes. Gala disrupted by employee whistleblower. Video of socialite slapping man goes viral. Charity fraud allegations shake elite circles. Ethan exhaled, long and shaky. Tomorrow morning he still had to make breakfast. He pulled into his apartment complex just as his neighbor, Mrs. Alvarez, was taking out the trash. She waved, smiling like it was any other night. "You're late," she said. Ethan nodded. "Work thing." He carried that normal moment with him upstairs like a shield. Inside, the apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the soft nightlight glowing in his daughter Lily's room. He checked on her, brushed a curl from her forehead, watched her chest rise and fall. "I did it for you," he whispered, unsure if that was true or just something he needed to believe. His phone buzzed again. This time, a voicemail from his CEO. The message was tight, controlled, furious beneath the politeness. "Ethan, we need to talk. You violated several policies tonight. Do not speak to anyone else. This can still be handled." Ethan deleted it without replying. Morning didn't wait for him. It arrived like it always did, with cereal spills and missing socks and Lily asking if he could come to her school assembly on Friday. "I'll try," he said, meaning it. His phone stayed face down on the counter, buzzing every few minutes like a trapped insect. When he finally picked it up, there were hundreds of notifications. Messages from strangers calling him a hero. Others calling him a liar. One email stood out, marked urgent, from Human Resources. "Effective immediately, your employment is under review." He laughed once, short and humorless. Of course it was. He packed Lily's lunch, walked her to school, kissed her goodbye. "Be brave today," she said, repeating his own words back to him. He watched her disappear into the building, then sat in the car and let the weight of it all settle. By noon, his face was everywhere. The slap. The smile. The moment on stage. Commentators argued about his tone, his motives, his right to speak. Vanessa Hartwell released a statement calling the incident regrettable, and accusing Ethan of manipulating private data for personal attention. The charity announced an internal audit. The CEO placed himself on temporary leave. Ethan's rent payment sat scheduled in his bank app, mocking him. He considered calling a lawyer, then laughed again. Lawyers cost money. Money required a job. He turned off the TV and sat in silence until a knock came at the door. Two people stood in the hallway, a woman in a gray coat holding a badge, and a man with a camera hanging loose at his side. "Mr. Cole?" the woman asked. "I'm Dana Reyes, investigative journalist. This is Mark. We'd like to hear your side." Ethan looked at the camera, then at Lily's drawing taped to the fridge behind them. He opened the door wider. "You have 10 minutes, he said. The interview changed everything. Not because of what he revealed, but because of how he spoke. He didn't rant. He didn't posture. He talked about spreadsheets and percentages, about families who applied for help and got nothing. He talked about working late nights fixing systems designed to hide truth in plain sight. When Dana asked about the slap, Ethan paused. "That wasn't the worst part," he said. "The worst part was how normal it felt for her to do it. That's the real problem." The clip aired that night. By morning, donors were pulling out. Board members were resigning. And Ethan Cole, single dad, former employee, became something he'd never wanted to be, a symbol. Symbols don't get to rest. His bank froze temporarily, due to unusual activity. His landlord left a note about late fees, polite but firm. His company officially terminated him for breach of confidentiality. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around cold coffee, and wondered if courage was supposed to feel this lonely. Then his phone rang again. A new number. He almost didn't answer. "Mr. Cole," a voice said, calm, older. "My name is Richard Hale. I sit on the oversight committee for 3 international nonprofits. We need to talk." Ethan closed his eyes. Here it was. The pushback. Or the offer. Sometimes they looked the same.